In the mid-1990s, the video game industry was entirely obsessed with empowerment. The massive success of Doom and Duke Nukem 3D taught developers that players wanted to be unstoppable gods. Growth meant moving faster, carrying bigger guns, and vaporizing anything that stood in your way. Power was the ultimate metric of fun. Then, Capcom released a game that dared to ask a completely different question. What if, instead of making the player feel powerful, we made them feel utterly helpless? When Resident Evil launched on the PlayStation in 1996, it didn't just top the sales charts. It coined an entirely new phrase on its loading screen: survival horror. But director Shinji Mikami and his team didn't invent this genre just by throwing zombies into a spooky house. They did it by weaponizing mechanical limitations. They engineered fear through software design, deliberately subverting the core laws of action games. Let's look at the blueprint of how they built a genre. To understand how Resident Evil engineered horror, we have to look at its most famous visual choice: fixed camera angles. In 1996, rendering a fully 3D environment in real time was incredibly taxing on hardware. If Capcom wanted a dynamic, moving camera, the mansion would have looked like a collection of blocky, untextured shapes. To bypass this hardware limitation, the team used a brilliant technical trick. They pre-rendered highly detailed 2D backgrounds as static images and layered a real-time 3D character model right on top of them. But this technical workaround quickly became the game's greatest psychological weapon. By fixing the camera in place, Shinji Mikami took visual control away from the player. You weren't looking where you wanted to look. You were looking where the director forced you to look. The sensation of voyeurism. Many camera angles were placed low to the ground behind furniture or high up in ceiling corners. This mechanically framed the player as the subject being watched, inducing a constant state of low-level paranoia. The blind spot metric. The fixed frames allowed developers to intentionally hide threats just outside the edge of the screen. You could walk down a corridor and hear the wet footsteps or low groans of a monster, but you couldn't see it until you took 2 more steps forward, triggering a sudden cut to a new perspective. The camera wasn't just a viewport, it was an active antagonist. It turned the environment into an optical puzzle where entering a new room was always a high-stakes gamble. If fixed camera angles provided the visual tension, the game's movement system provided the physical panic. This brings us to the most debated mechanic in gaming history: tank controls. In Resident Evil, pressing up on your controller always moves your character forward in the direction they are facing, regardless of where the camera is looking. If the camera angle suddenly cuts to the opposite side of the room, up still moves you forward. While modern players often dismiss this as primitive design, tank controls were a deliberate, mechanically brilliant choice for survival horror. If Capcom had used screen relative controls, where pressing left moves you left on your screen, the moment the fixed camera angle cut to a new perspective, your character would instantly pull a U-turn and run right back into the danger you were trying to escape. Tank controls preserved navigational consistency across cinematic cuts. But more importantly, tank controls altered the action economy of combat by deliberate sluggishness with the static aiming constraint. Deliberate Sluggishness meant turning around required a slow, physical rotation. You couldn't instantly flick away from danger. This meant that positioning wasn't just a preference, it was a survival metric. And with the static aiming constraint, you could not run and gun. To fire a weapon, you had to completely freeze in place, raise your gun into a combat stance, and manually tilt your aim down, up, or center. By mechanically decoupling movement from aiming and slowing down your rotational speed, the game turned every single zombie into a major physical threat. It successfully simulated physical panic. When a monster is lunging at you in a narrow hallway, the horror doesn't come from the monster's speed. It comes from the terrifying realization of how long it takes your own body to turn around and run away. In a standard action game, item collection is a dopamine hit. You run over a box of ammo, a sound effect chirps, and your counter goes up. But Resident Evil turned item management into an existential crisis. It introduced the economy of scarcity, making resource management the true cerebral core of the survival horror genre. The mechanical pressure of Resident Evil relies entirely on a highly restrictive grid inventory system. Chris Redfield only has 6 slots. Jill Valentine has 8. A massive rocket launcher takes up the same physical space as a tiny mansion key. This design choice forced players into a constant state of mental calculation. The inventory bottleneck. You could never carry everything you needed. If you went out fully armed with a shotgun, handgun, and health items, you wouldn't have enough empty slots to pick up the puzzle items required to progress through the house. You were constantly forced to make dangerous treks back to storage boxes. The weight of execution. Ammunition was strictly finite. The game didn't provide enough bullets to kill every enemy in the mansion. Therefore, pulling the trigger wasn't an act of aggression, it was an expenditure of resources. Combat became a calculation. Is it worth spending 3 bullets to clear this hallway, or should I take the physical risk of weaving past this zombie to save the ammo for later? The cost of saving. Even saving your game was a physical item. You could not save unless you possessed an ink ribbon and stood directly in front of a typewriter. If you ran out of ribbons, your progress was completely unprotected. This loop birthed the concept of the safe room. These small, secure rooms, accompanied by a distinct, calming musical theme, became literal psychological sanctuaries. Off-screen, the systems were relentless, but inside the safe room, the player could breathe, manage their grid, and plan their next terrifying run into the dark. The gameplay wasn't about killing monsters. It was about managing a logistics crisis under extreme duress. When we look back at the landscape of 1996, Resident Evil looks like an anomaly. It succeeded not by giving the market what it thought it wanted, but by introducing a completely new mechanical philosophy. By pairing the cinematic claustrophobia of fixed camera angles with the deliberate, panic-inducing layout of tank controls, and locking it all behind a ruthless economy of scarce resources, Capcom didn't just build a scary game. They established a baseline architectural structure for interactive terror. They proved that true engagement doesn't always come from power. Sometimes, the most memorable experiences in gaming are born when a developer strips away your options, dims the lights, locks the doors, and forces you to survive with nothing but 2 shotgun shells, an empty inventory slot, and a long, dark hallway ahead of you. Thanks for watching. If you want to explore more design histories of the mechanics that defined our favorite genres, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know your absolute scariest Resident Evil memory in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next video.
もういい、休んでくれ。